So I had encountered a person some years ago by the name of Prasad Kaipa.
Yeah.
And he's somebody who, in his own thing, tried to connect Indian wisdom to leadership development. And he had created a certain kind of framework that was at least talking about leadership and the chakras, right?
Yeah.
So I really based that and connected it to the ideas that I was developing. And I saw in that, that it was really connected to a lot of the journey of leadership, right? From many, many different levels. And so I was able to organize into this many things. So you can think about even Tobert's model or Ken Wilber's work. All of these are the evolution. These are these leader level forms, right?
Yeah.
That are there.
Yeah.
And so also when I looked at, the change agents that I had been thinking about and helping, how do people create greater change in the world, I could map those levels out to the different states of chakras, all the way from being not in control of your life to being dependent on other people to being kind of that leader of self.
Yeah.
But then moving up to being a leader of groups and organizations, to really starting to move towards the direction of leading change and being the head of a movement, whatever that movement is, to really about creating greater social transformation in the way that Gandhi and Mandela did, and to then those spiritual leaders that operated in the zone of oneness and saw liberation, ultimate liberation, as liberation from self and our own mindset, rather than the physical environment that the other levels were focused on, right? So all of that became very, very clear. You could also map it to a CCL framework of going from dependent to independent to interdependent, right?
Right.
And also what we were using in LBB fit in there, that it was this journey from leading self to leading with others to changing your world. So at the higher levels, it was truly about changing the wider world. At the lower levels, it is at best about yourself, right? So I think this all started to come into focus for me. And the idea that the chakras and all these models have existed for a long time is that because they're salient and they've emerged from different cultures.
Yeah,
right? In terms of our human journey and evolution.
What happens, Lyndon? I mean, what is this, the movement of Kundalini up the spine? Can you say a little bit more? I mean, I'm trying to see how that is linked to how you would be in the world.
Yeah, so that is not kind of a practice that I'm so familiar with, that I've worked with.
Okay.
But on the other hand, what happens with meditation and from a deeper meditation practice, you start to connect, with some degree the zone of emptiness, right? Because what you're trying to do with meditation is create a state of stillness.
Yeah.
To really get the noise in your mind to settle down, right? And sometimes when you reach that state of deep meditation, what you encounter is ultimate stillness. It's kind of a level of peace, right? And the interesting thing about that is that it's also the zone of infinity, right? Infinity is emptiness. So the interesting thing here also is that, say you go out into space, most of what's out there is just emptiness, and it's infinite. But if you go into our cells and the atom structure, again, what's in between all of that is just emptiness, right? So this is, again, an idea that Indian philosophy has explored. So between this notion of the Atman, which is in everybody, the great divine being, but is one level it makes sense because emptiness can penetrate everything. It can be a part of everything, and it can also connect everything. So it's both within, but it is that idea of oneness that connects the whole, right? So I think so. My sense is that when you go within, you really connect with the divine, but then you connect with the divine in everything else because you found it within yourself, right? So again, that Indian idea of even with the gesture of namaste, I bow to the divine within you, right? Recognizing your divinity. So that's a very central idea, and it's there in Christian and even Sufi mysticism that's there. But oftentimes when Western civilization particularly evolved in a certain kind of way. There was this idea of God as being this God, the king on the throne, and you're, the servant of God, or, you're there to be obedient to God. So it's almost a medieval kind of understanding of God.
Yeah.
Well, previously, I think earlier in our being as human beings, there was a much more organic understanding of God, as being manifest in the world around us. And I do see that, for instance, one of the traditions that came out of India, of course, is Buddhism.
Yeah.
And Einstein and a lot of really smart scientific people have thought Buddhism to be the most evolved religion.
Yeah.
Because it was really about the mind and
mind,
coming to terms
yeah, mind and consciousness, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How that creates our reality, how we see the world, how we operate in the world. And the Buddha, so many years ago, put his finger on this, again, through the journey of meditation. And, with many, many things that are growing out there, the resonance and the ideas in Buddhism, I feel that are ones that are really growing in the world in terms of consciousness. We're coming back to understanding the value of meditation and mindfulness, a lot of the things that are embedded in that practice. Now, Buddhism, of course, itself turned into being more of a religion. Buddha was turned into a god. He created all the rituals. So in a way, in many Buddhist practices, they turned Buddhism into just another religion. But the core ideas were really not religious, right?
Yeah.
They were really about consciousness. And in fact, in the Buddha's belief, there is no God.
Yeah.
It's just the system that exists, which the scientists could say, yeah, there is a system that guides the universe and how things move.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whether it's physics, the biology, all of these are systems that are somehow operating in a way together that we are still trying to understand.
Yeah. In for you then, and now I'm trying to link this back to to LBB. How are these interlinked? Your spiritual journey, your work with LBB. Were they sort of happening in parallel? I mean, what were the stages of LBB for you? I mean, 10 years is a substantial amount of time. How are these two things sort of co-evolving, Lyndon?
Yeah, so I think the latter stuff that I was talking about right now is probably more of the journey and the work that I want to do moving forward.
Right.
I'm working to articulate, because so much in leadership development, shies clear of any kind of spiritual zone.
Yeah.
And at the higher levels of that chakra framework, there are very, very few people that might be leaders of movement, let alone people like Mandela and Gandhi, let alone, figures like the Buddha, or Krishna, right?
Yeah.
That those aren't, you can't really say, well, I see myself aspiring to be one of those people. But you could say, well, that's where I want to be headed in terms of my evolution and development.
Yeah.
But in the zones below, I mean, people are really focused on, my own journey, and the intersection between purpose, which is again connected to what is that calling, which is again what emerges from, being able to quieten your mind and get clarity about, who am I really?
Yeah.
What am I wanting to do? What is my calling? Those spaces are a thread, again in that chakra framework. But as you move up, then as far as usually most leaders get, or most leadership programs go, is, how do I lead in groups and organizations, right? It's more in that zone of a leader in some kind of system. But, when you move higher, and this is where I think we took the LBB framework, Change Your World, and that's, again, not an orientation that I had growing up myself. I never saw myself as somebody who could change the world, right? I was just trying to operate in the world, right? Operating in a world that was some kind of given, and navigate my way in. But this idea of saying, well, hey, you can change the world and you can change your world is a pretty profound idea that is deeply empowering. And I think we could take that notion even to, people who are very poor and marginalized, because when you look at the work of Viktor Frankl, right, which you are familiar with, that shift in consciousness, even when he was, in a prison camp with very, very little liberty and freedom, he could still create that level of freedom within. I've heard the same story from people who are in prisons. Again, no freedom of movement or choice, but you can create this ultimate freedom within you, right? So I think that these notions are really relevant to people who are in zones of distress, because sometimes you can't change the external world, but you can change your internal world. And when that shifts on the inside, it starts to manifest on the outside in the way that Viktor Frankl talked about it. So I kind of had early on in the LBB journey where all these dots started to connect. I remember this person who was doing, and I don't know if I shared this with you along the way in our conversations anytime, but I encountered this guy who was doing leadership development for an Indian company, a retail company. And they were hiring a lot of kids from slums, to work as store clerks and in their retail operations. But they were doing some very sophisticated things with them from a leadership development perspective. And I said, how did you think of doing this stuff with these folks? We're just doing basic skill training, because they were exploring these issues of self-awareness and purpose and whole life perspectives with these people. And the guy said, well, I was watching beggars at a traffic intersection in Bombay, and I noticed that some of them were doing better than the others. So I said, well, what was it that made the difference? What was different? He said their sense of self, their sense of personal dignity. And that allowed them, even as they were begging, to connect with the people that they were seeing, and that dramatically increased their effectiveness. Because in a way, the beggars that you might know that come up to your window in Bombay typically are knocking on your window, trying to look pitiful, trying to evoke your sympathy. But there are other ones that come to you and that might be there with a smile and look you with the eye, and suddenly you see the humanness of who they are. You see their dignity, and that makes a difference. And in a way, when we can tune into that thing about ourselves, we become confident. We have poise. We have the willingness to persist and overcome adversity. We have that self-clarity that becomes that compass for life. And then it's not so much, the short-term success or failure. You're living a life that is aligned with your purpose, and that's the big and most important thing.
So in your LBB efforts, Lyndon, is that the sort of concept that you were bringing to more and more groups of people?
Yes, So so some of the work that I've been doing in India, say with a Global Citizen Program, which is the program I designed from scratch, and almost that was much, much more about my own voice in there, that has it very, very clearly there. I think a lot of the other things that we've done are much more focused on what you might think about as horizontal development, less about this vertical development.
Will you be able to share with me, did you call it the Global Citizen Program?
Yeah, Global Citizen Leader. This is the program that I've been doing with those MBA students in India.
Okay. No, but that's not from the LBB space.
It is.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay, because I thought the LBB space was much more towards the underprivileged.
No, it's for all people, because in LBB, we're working with underserved, right? And so students at large don't get leadership development, right? Only when you are typically the people who come through CCL programs, it's getting younger nowadays, but it was typically people who are in their 40s. Right? They've now arrived at being a leader. This is the time you get leadership development. But the thing is that you need it when you're much, much younger. So that it helps you evolve, from that leader of self. Everybody is a leader of their own lives, and everybody has the potential to make stuff happen in the world if they can tune into their calling, So I think when you start earlier on, you can tune into these ideas. Versus when you're working with professionals in an organization where it's much more about their performance in that organization.
So coming back to that notion around, I mean, you started on this journey because of a prompt from your manager, and then you had this conviction that, so many of the things that you were interested in are coming together. As you went through the journey, how is your own perspective changing? I think we've spoken a little bit about what your perspective is today around, how leadership and leadership development, but also leadership linked to, the various, what's the best way to put it? I like that. I mean, that's the easiest way probably, from dependence and interdependence, independence towards interdependence. But how was it before? I'm curious to know, how is LBB contributing towards changing your perspective? What was your perspective on leadership and leadership development before that?
I think it was much more in that professional zone, much more you could think about horizontal.
Horizontal, okay.
Okay. Okay. Knowledge and skill.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was as clearly grounded in that zone of purpose and identity. Right? It was much more, you could say it was more some of those pieces of emotional intelligence that might be about social, interpersonal skills. Right? But I think we seem to have, in many cases growing up, we gloss over this idea of what should I do with my life? Right?
Yeah.
And you just your parents tell you what to do. If you look at what the job opportunities are, maybe somebody tells you what your skills are, what you're good at. All of those things become drivers. This is really saying, who am I? What am I about? What is the difference I want to make with my life?
Yeah.
Increasingly as you have more responsibilities, as you grow up, it becomes a little bit harder to climb out of that rut.
Yeah, and that was where I was going to, because you probably are also at a stage in your life where you have your own children and responsibility towards them, or aging parents, I don't know what. I mean, how does one bring those things together, or how did you support people to bring those things together?
Yeah, and Shivangi, one second, I've reached the office, so I'm just going to continue to sit in my car and talk, but I'll just turn off my car, but it's going to disconnect us for a moment, and I'll be back on.
Sure.
Yes. Shivangi, can you still hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Let me see if I...
Is your drive very easy, Lyndon? Because you were so much in the conversation. I'm like, wow, you were really multitasking.
Right. Let's see. I'm trying to turn on my car without turning on the engine so I can get the audio through the car system. Take a moment here. Okay. I think we might be... Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, and because I turned it back on, my music has started playing here. 1 second.
You back?
Yeah, I'm back. Okay. Maybe you couldn't hear it, but for some reason when I turned on...
No, I couldn't. Yeah, I couldn't hear the music.
You couldn't hear it. It started playing some music, actually. So it automatically starts doing that. So I'm back on.
Okay.
And I can talk. Maybe I can go somewhere around another 5-7 minutes.
Yeah. I think that should be plenty. We are closing to that hour. Well, I'll bring you to that. To that notion of 4 ways of knowing, and really, try to understand from your perspective. As I hear, as I listen to you, all of this seems to be very, what's the word? Very intellectual and very, very grounded, very, very thought through. And I'm wondering if there were elements of other ways of knowing, and I have labeled them as more emotional or embodied or intuitive, that contributed towards what now seems to be a very brought together sort of notion around leadership development.
Yeah, and I think all of this is, of course, what I've kind of talked about has been at least a 10-year kind of journey.
Yeah.
So it hasn't happened in an instant, right?
Yeah.
And there were probably sparks of awareness and lots of challenges along the way that I had to wrestle with. A lot of stuff, again, coming back to what I call the 4 learning tactics, things that I read, things that I did, conversations that I had, some of the reflections that I engaged in that put together this picture that seems well put together to you, which is good to know. But it didn't come together all at once. Maybe when I started to work on that chakra framework, that became an integrating idea, where these things came together. So I think there are maybe just one thing that I might say might be more, again, an intellectual thing, but there is something that maybe, when, say, my boss, coming back to the beginning of a conversation, asked me to take on this role or this assignment, there are things that come together in your life, that maybe make you feel alive, that make sense, that you feel connected suddenly to everything. That, as Steve Jobs talked about, the dots connect backwards. So I think that, in a way, even with the chakra framework, just all this amorphous stuff that I've been reading and doing and thinking all suddenly came together, And so I think there are those times, I think, in one's journey where there is that moment of convergence that creates a sense of clarity and direction and purpose. And it doesn't always happen. You're right that oftentimes we're just working in a world of noise, and trying to figure our way through. And for me, this need, I think, which, when you're busy, it's easy to get away from, to actually create the silence and the space to say, well, what's the right thing to do here? Where am I right now? To center oneself, to tune in. And Gandhi, of course, who was very much in tune with all of this, said in his clever way, I have a really busy day today. I have a lot to do. So I really need to meditate an hour extra. Right? He, recognized that connection. That it was his ability to do was really connected to his ability to turn within and create that sense of clarity and commitment for himself, and how he would show up in an authentic way there.
Yeah, no, definitely. During this journey, Lyndon, what sort of support mechanisms have you thrived on? I mean, have you been having regular conversations with a mentor or a coach or a therapist? I mean, what has been supportive to you?
Yeah, probably my wife probably is the one that I talk with the most about these things.
Yeah.
I probably have lots of conversations with various people about different aspects of this, but probably some, and often there are older people. They're people who are on the cusp of retirement, that I can have deeper conversations like the one that we're having. And maybe they've also arrived at that same place in the journey.
Right.
Having lived a life, done a lot of things, read a lot of things, encountered stuff, come to that same zone where it kind of converges. So I've had many conversations. I wouldn't say that there is one kind of person in that same way. Probably my wife is probably the one that we talk with, most about these ideas, in a continual way. But yeah, I think I've only when you go through leadership programs, you have coaches that are assigned to you.
Yeah.
But they're very short-term things.
Sure,
and I think only one time in my life I sought out a professional coach for a couple of sessions as I was working through a transition. It seemed like a good thing to have. But as a practice, I haven't done as much of that. And also in a work environment, it's often difficult to talk about some of your fears, frustrations, challenges with a colleague.
Sure, yeah,
right?
yeah. It wouldn't be potentially somebody you're working with. Yeah. No, definitely. And when you were, what were, because I'm also trying to find out, what pulls people back. So, I mean, looking at it from Taubert's lens around, let's say, an evolving action logic, and yet when you are stressed and things are not going in the direction that you want them to go, then the notion is that you get pulled back into maybe an earlier action logic or an earlier way of being. For you, what have been those sort of triggers that pull you back? And then how do you sustain, in spite of those, I don't know what you could call them, I mean, triggers probably, sustain that action logic that you thrive on, or that you operate on most of the time?
Yeah, I think there are moments when there is stress that's imposed from sometimes the outside.
Yeah.
It definitely does push you to move lower down to that lower self. It comes more about sense of survival, or not getting losing things that might be of benefit to you, at least from that. So I think that when you go within, I'm coming back to this theme because this is where I'm at the ultimate transformation, the ultimate liberation, right?
Yeah.
The ultimate journey of human existence. This is what the Buddha said. He said, I come to teach one thing and one thing only, the nature of suffering and the end of suffering.
Yeah.
Right? So, that was where liberation comes.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it is that turning within, because I think that provides you with that sense of faith that, what is happening right now is not necessarily what will be, and there might be something that's going on that is beyond your knowing, right? Yeah. So I think in many of these spiritual traditions, there is the ability to let go, to not want to grasp, not to want to control things.
Yeah.
Because I think oftentimes what leadership development tends to focus on, unfortunately, is almost you being kind of the master of your destiny, controlling things. And in fact, as you move higher up, there is action, but there is also surrender, right? That's the essence of Bhagavad Gita, right? It's for you to do your actions, but not for you to know or control the outcomes, right?
What fascinated me was what you mentioned around CCL's, journey towards wanting to come out of the rut and becoming innovative, and also everything you mentioned around digital transformation, and what are the possibilities for that are offered today by wearable technology and big data, etc., and you going to the board to present those possibilities and coming out with not so much of a strong mandate, but being told, okay, use operating cash, change in CEO, and everything that you were telling me. I'm just wondering, how are you in your evolved way of being? How are you interacting with that reality in your professional life?
I think that there is, right now, I moved through a zone of being frustrated and disappointed and feeling a sense, gosh, I failed, all that kind of stuff, to really saying, that there might be a deeper purpose in all of this, right, that I cannot see. And my job is to keep after it, right, in whatever way I can, because, again, that's my purpose. That's what I need to do. So not to focus on the outcomes you see, because those are short-term. And already I can start to see new possibilities emerge. I can start to see where things might turn in the future, So I think that ability to relax and surrender into it, allows, the space to not necessarily kind of, if you will, rest or get anchored in frustration.
So is this similar, Lyndon, to this notion of creative indifference? which is, and that's a more Gestalt notion, but really thinking about doing your best. I mean, like you said, action and surrender, doing your best and ensuring that you have the passion, that you show the passion that you have for, a particular intention that you feel will contribute to the betterment of society. And yet at the same time, almost being dispassionate or indifferent to the outcomes. I mean, is that a similar notion?
It is, yeah. Though it is not indifferent, I think often you care deeply. But I think what you have to release is more of the kind of control that, and again, Buddhism, sometimes they call it grasping.
Yeah.
It's kind of, and again, in the chakra model, it's desire. But I want this. And sometimes it's your desire for certain outcomes to happen in a certain time and place, a certain way, that creates the suffering. It's the expectations that we put. And it's all a mental thing because we're creating that. It doesn't have to be that way. And the only way to kind of shift out of that is to shift your mindset, And the way to do that, again, that I've found is much more in that zone of contemplation and meditation, where you find the stillness and the surrender. So I come back to those ideas. It's not a cognitive thing. Because the cognitive thing, again, spins with all the noise and thinks about, if I do this, if I do that, or how about that?
Yeah.
But when you surrender, you can do what you can do and be okay with it, You don't have to drive yourself crazy.
Yeah. Thank you, Lyndon. Wow, this has been another rich conversation with you, and it's amazing how you're helping me to connect the dots, because some of the ideas that you have mentioned are sort of, I know or I have read about them, and yet I don't know, if you know what I mean. Yet I don't really, they're not in my bones. They are not something that I live by. I associate with them at a much more intellectual level. And like you said, it's a life's journey. It's not something that if you read and you called it codified knowledge. I think just because you've read about something or you've downloaded something, that doesn't mean that that will really transform you, right? It can contribute if you take then the time to reflect and coming back to Kolb's learning cycle, then maybe practicing some of those ideas in the real world and seeing how then you are able to be with what emerges. So yeah, it's fascinating. It's really fascinating. Thank you so much, Lyndon. I'm going to try and again, I'm happy I've recorded another 10, 12 pages of notes, but really trying to maybe I'll come back to you once I am able to really understand, as I said, what is it that you're saying, because I think I get bits of it, but you are speaking from in my mind a far more evolved place, and it will be I'll take a few years to really understand you. But can you help me with sending me that work on chakras, your papers on that you mentioned, and also this global citizenship program, to see if I can actually, at least at a codified way, understand some of these ideas more granularly? Yeah, I can send you some things. So with Anne, I've got a book project that's going to integrate, all these things that I've been talking about. Yeah. And I have maybe only short snippets, but I can send you a couple of things that have pieces of it. And maybe when you look at them, you'll hear or, see things that are connected to what I've been talking about. I haven't written that big book yet. Yeah, I mean, that book I will wait for sure. but also this chakra framework, I'm wondering if I should actually involve, use that in my literature review, and that's always the challenge when you're researching, right? Because I was blissfully unaware of something like that existing but I am at this moment in my literature review phase, and the supervisor has said, be careful with not mixing, data that you're getting from your interviewees and then bringing it, back into the literature review. But I do feel that if the chakra framework exists and, it has been taught and codified in a way that multiple people have understood, then it can be very much a part of a literature review, right?
Yeah, so where you'll find it, so the linkage in the way that I've talked about the chakras, I haven't seen anything that has been done that has made that explicit connection, but where you'll find it is, there's something called spiral dynamics.
Oh, is it there? Oh my God, that was one thing I had stayed away from. Okay.
Yeah. But that's based on the same kind of ideas.
Okay.
There is also Ken Wilber built on that in his theory of everything.
Yeah.
That's embedded there.
Yeah.
There. You'll find it in the work of Frederick Laloux.
Yeah.
Laloux, yeah, it's there. You'll also find it in Taubert's work with, his 7 levels. Again, that's, exactly not the same, but also about the 7 chakras, the same 7 levels of transformation.
So there's not actually a book or an article or a website that is talking about chakras?
No, there is a lot of stuff that's talking about chakras, but nothing that I know that is talking about chakras and leadership.
And leadership development, of course, yeah. There's a lot of stuff that talks about chakras and Kundalini yoga and all that, but not necessarily linking it to leadership development. This person that you mentioned, Prasad Kaipa, he also does not have a book or a website or something where he links these?
Yeah, no, I think he's got books, but I don't think it's not a book that he's written about this particular topic. So we developed some of this together.
Yeah.
And I think at best it exists in like a PowerPoint presentation that we talk through. And it represents a certain kind of logic that I've used for designing.
Right.
But I don't think, to the best of my knowledge, this particular idea has been published.
Okay. So you would advise at the moment to then read Wilber, Laloux, and Spiral Dynamics.
Yeah, those are the kinds of places. Even Taubert, I think.
And Taubert, yeah.
Taubert, I met with him and I talked about this stuff, and I think he sees it as connected, but of course he's operating from his own framework, his own model, which is not necessarily. He's probably built it on some of these insights as well, but I don't think it's derived directly from the chakras.
Sure. And in terms of Ken Wilber, that is really something that I feel a bit afraid of because it just seems so integrated and huge. What would it be in your mind, like a simplest version of Ken Wilber to allude to read and to try to digest?
Yeah. Recently I was in Seattle and I found a book of his in a used bookstore, and there was a publication company called Shambhala.
I know Shambhala. Yeah, Shambhala is the tradition of Buddhism that I'm following, and there is a company called A Sounds True who also works with him. So Shambhala Publications. And which book?
So they have, I think they have at least, I don't know if they have multiples, but they have one publication they put out on Ken Wilber's work.
Yeah.
That is a quick, I pretty much worked through it over dinner. So it's a quick read. It's more visual.
Yeah.
And it's got some of those core ideas that he's been working on. So that's pretty accessible.
And it's on Kindle, you said. It's on Kindle.
Sorry?
Is it on Kindle, you said?
I don't know if it's on Kindle, but it's a publication by Shambhala.
Okay.
Okay. And Ken Wilber.
Yeah.
So, I don't, it's something, I don't know if it's exactly called the theory of everything. They've created some slightly alternative title.
Yeah.
But I think you might find that much, much more accessible, and it's got all the core ideas.
Okay, perfect. That's great. Thank you so much, Lyndon. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. And I'll write to you separately and see if we have dates in India that coincide. Now you probably know your plan in much more detail, huh?
Yeah, I do now. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Have a very good day. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye, Lyndon.
You're welcome. Okay, talk to you later. Bye.
Talk to you. Bye.